This is TWiT.
Who came up with this surveillance capitalism? Where did it come from?
Well, great question. I write about the invention of surveillance capitalism at Google in the year 2001. And you're absolutely right, because the correct way to think about this is surveillance capitalism is something that was, you know, that fine line between being stumbled into and being invented, which is pretty much how the engineers at the Ford Motor Company felt about the, quote, discovery and invention of mass production. You know, there was actually a day that historians write about in the Ford Motor Company where, you know, at the end of the day, the engineers looked up from this work that they were doing, creating this moving assembly line, and they looked at each other, and there was a sense of recognition that they had just broken through to a new kind of economic logic of high volume, low unit cost. That was an economic logic that had not existed before. Similarly, at Google, we see a situation where in the teeth of financial crisis, in the dot-com bust, you know, Google had what most people agreed was the best search engine. They had the snazziest venture capitalists, you know, the most glamorous and the highest status venture capitalists who were investing in their dream. But here was the dot-com bust, and there was every reason to believe that Google was going to go down along with a lot of other small companies in Silicon Valley. And up until that time, you know, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the founders of Google, they had been very vocal, very public about their abhorrence of advertising. They regarded advertising online as something that would deform the online environment and would separate online businesses from their users, which at that time were still conceivably something that you could think about as customers, users, customers. It wasn't really clear yet. So,
but they were collecting data. They were collecting data about how people used Google to improve the engine. At the time, the deal was, we'll collect the data to give you an improved product.
Yes, and things like improving search, and also, you know, figuring out that great translation machine, because they would, you know, they would see how people spelled and how they corrected their spelling errors, and that would feed into the learning, the computer learning for translation and so forth. So at that point, there was what I think of as a balance of power between Google and its users.
See, I feel like I'm stuck in that I thought we were still there, and I've often said, well, you should know what data they're collecting and how they're using it, and then you can make a rational decision about whether you're getting enough value back for the data you're putting into the machine. But that turns out to be an antiquated concept, unfortunately.
Yeah, darling, we blew past that a long time ago.
Around about 2000 with the dot-com bust, right?
That's right.
The VCs went running, screaming to Google saying, but how are you going to make money?
Exactly. And there was a lot of terror and a lot of anxiety. And the people who documented that period, you know, are very, very eloquent about it. And what I like to say is that while these events have been well documented, they have been poorly understood and barely theorized.
Yeah.
So that's where I think we can make some progress. So what happened was we had this balance of power. You know, that's why these guys never wanted to charge users, because at that point, the company needed its users for this data to improve its services just about as much as the users needed the company. So there was this nice balance of power. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with collecting data if it's very clear and there is a clear social and legal contract that those data are being used for the benefit of the users in exactly the ways that they understand them to be. Demonstrably so. But something happened in this crisis. You know, the concept of state of exception. A little bit of what we see going on in Washington today. You know, the state of exception is what is called upon to say, all right, we've got such an emergency going on here that we have to suspend our normal values and our normal rules and operating procedures. And we've got to do something really dire because it's an emergency. So essentially, the founders declared a state of exception. And in the state of exception, they decided to go back to this whole realm of advertising and see if they couldn't make a kind of breakthrough there. And parallel to this, you know, as people were browsing and searching and all of that, there was collateral data that was being thrown off by those activities that Google wasn't using. And in fact, they were only haphazardly stored according to the documentation. They were called data logs, and they were in servers, but they weren't organized or stored. And there were some folks at Google who had been playing around with those data logs and slowly coming to the understanding that there was tremendous predictive value in those discarded data. Well, in the state of exception, folks went back to those data and they began to take a more careful look. So you take those data which were exclusive to Google, and then you add to that Google's computational ability, which, by the way, even back then, they like to talk about as, quote, artificial intelligence. So they were way ahead in their computational ability. So you take their computational power, their computational ability, their exclusive proprietary access to these formerly discarded data, you put that all together, and they discovered that they had the way to make very, very accurate predictions about the kinds of ads that a user is likely to click on. That became known as the click-through rate, and of course that became the signal of the experience, the perceived relevance of an ad. So what Google did was, at that point, you still had a system where advertisers were choosing keywords and deciding where they would place their ads. Well, Google said, look, we are going to cut you completely out of that choice. We're going to let our new computational abilities and our new data that we're integrating here, we are going to make the choice for you based on these new skills. We are going to make the choice. We are going to tell you where to put the ad based on what these analyses tell us. And by telling you where to put that ad, we can now target your ad to the person and people who are most likely to click on it. Well, the rest is history, as everybody knows. But what is it exactly that happened here? That's what we've got to figure out. And my way of making sense of this is what happened here was we took data that was more than was required to make a great search engine or a great translation product and so forth. These extra data were surplus. They were just lying around. In fact, back then, people called them data exhaust and digital exhaust and things like that, like waste material. So who's going to be upset? You know, if we take this waste material and start to use it, that's supposed to be a good thing, right? So we take the surplus behavioral data. Now we apply our unique computational capabilities to that. And what we are actually producing here are predictions. I call them prediction products. And what are they predictions of? Well, let's just zoom out a little bit, decouple from the idea of click-through. And what we're really saying is these are predictions of future behavior, predictions of what you are going to do, not only now, but soon and later. So we have behavioral surplus combined with new machine intelligence to create prediction products that predict the future of human behavior. New kinds of markets were configured. In the old world here, we talk about them as though they were simply markets for targeted advertising, targeted online advertising. But again, zoom out. And what becomes clear is that this new formula happened to be invented in the context of online targeted advertising, but it's no more limited to that context than, for example, mass production is limited to the fabrication of the Model T, where it was first invented.